Hi, everybody. I'm April Cummings. This is Edbeat. Joining me magically, Patrick Brendel from Cayman Life. Hey, Patrick.
Hi, April. How are you?
I'm doing very well. What people can't see behind the scenes is that I have been experimenting with about 15,000 different pieces of equipment today. So I'm a little sweaty, Patrick, but it's all good. I can hear, I can see you, and we can talk education today because that is our goal. Yes. He's ready to go. So this week, if you weren't paying attention, and frankly, even if you were paying attention, you probably didn't have much of a choice but to hear about it. The strategic policy statement in the House of Parliament, I was going to say Legislative Assembly, we have changed. We are now the House of Parliament, which really kind of outlines the projections for expenditures for economic growth. It also gives you a pretty good idea generally of what the government, in this case a new government, the PACT government, sees as its priorities in terms of spending. No money, often no, corresponding, shall we say, investment in the success of your plans. So education, I found interesting, Patrick, was listed, the Deputy Premier, the Honorable Chris Saunders, when he made his presentation, he outlined his 9 areas, and education was the first area that he mentioned. Let's talk a little bit about your observations, about what you heard coming out of the strategic policy statement. And of course, we heard from the Deputy Premier, the Premier, Leader of the Opposition a bit, and the Honorable Juliana O'Connor Conley, who is not only the Education Minister now, but was under the previous government as well. So Patrick, what did you kind of take away from what you heard? Can you kind of give us like a high-level view?
Yeah. So if the PACT government has made education their number one priority, and people talk about putting your money where your mouth is, well, they'll be doing that literally, because their kind of headline initiative is providing free school meals for all 5,000 children in public schools, and that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
In total, the SPS has 29 different initiatives just relate under the heading of education. So you can look at it like a Christmas tree with ornaments and presents everywhere. So you've got free school meals, you've got public nursery programs for 3-year-olds in the primary schools. You're talking going up and increasing the age that people are eligible for postgraduate scholarships. They want to bring back A-levels and put them back into the public schools. And then this is a big one that kind of got buried a little bit, but free tuition for Caymanians to UCCI and ICCI. They have before school programs, after school programs, new homework centers, a learning support center in every school to help kids who are struggling. Every school is going to have a nurse. Every public school is going to have a teacher's assistant in every class up to year 9. They're talking about student laptops, making sure every student has internet access at home. They want to, do a lot of stuff, and it's not just on the spending front. It also addresses policy initiatives as well. For example, they want to have, I think they call it like a unified or a comprehensive technical vocational education training curriculum that's now going to start in primary schools. They want to introduce legislation and a framework for greater accountability for schools and teachers. They want to promote the integration of Caymanian and non-Caymanians into the school system. And they want to improve graduation criteria to end the practice of social promotion. And, last but not least, they're talking about creating a board of governors to oversee this operation of public schools. So just about anything you wanted with schools, you got it.
Wow. So it just sounds so lovely, all of it, right? But we're in the news business, and one of our jobs is to sort of lift the rock up and make sure there's nothing weird under there, but also really to scrutinize how public money is being spent. That is part of our job. And so my first thought was, oh, this sounds wonderful. And then I went, is there a catch anywhere? When is the other shoe going to drop on this Christmas parade, And I don't know what the answer to that is, I'll be honest. But it is a huge investment in education. Now, depending on what happens with the reopening of the borders and the sort of economic situation in the country, I am of the belief that if you are in a period of, let's say it was a normal recession or some other downturn, it does make sense actually to invest heavily, from my perspective, in education. It's a great time. Sometimes people are out of work. Sometimes they need extra skills. So I'm not just talking about the primary age kids, but all the way up through, tertiary education and beyond, for that matter. So, you know what I mean? It's post-COVID, it does make sense to invest in education. And also, if you campaigned on a platform that focused heavily on, we need, to Cayman students and schools need to be the best they can be, and we want more and better, you would have to invest some time, energy, and money in that. What are your thoughts kind of on what you're seeing so far?
Well, it's interesting because at the closing of the SPS, so Premier, the Deputy Premier and Premier Wayne Panton introduced the SPS. Opposition Leader Roy McTaggart gave a response, and then at the conclusion, the Premier made another statement. And in his statement, he alluded to, he called it a myth. He called it a big lie that somehow graduates of the public school system aren't performing well enough and that they aren't fit for the job market. And he did point. He basically said, how could this be true when Cayman public education is one of the best funded education systems per capita in the region? And I'll just point to that part of it because that's understating it. We've done research based on what the Auditor General put out when they studied the education system a couple years ago. Cayman actually has one of the best funded education systems in the world. So when I looked at countries in the OECD, the only country that spends more per student on their education system is Luxembourg. So it's like Luxembourg's up here, Cayman's here, then you go US, Canada, Jamaica, everybody's down there. So Cayman has already had one of the best funded education systems in the world per student. And according to the SPS, the new one, they're going to increase that spending by another 50%. So in 2019, which is the latest figures that I've gotten from the Auditor General, education spending was estimated at $95 million. And so you can, I kind of assume that it's around $100 million for 2020. So by 2024, they want to increase it to $152 million. And that's just operations.
So let me just go back to get a little bit of clarity about where Cayman is in terms of its spend per student. I just want to make sure that I'm getting this and we're explaining it right. I often think of things in terms of per capita, or when we talk about the per student spend, are we comparing apples to apples? Is it just a blanket amount per student that we do versus so-and-so do, or are there other factors taken into consideration? I don't know, the cost of living in the various countries, etc. I just kind of want to make sure that
it would be adjusted for currency, not adjusted for cost of living. So you'll see when you look at countries like the Philippines and Mexico and elsewhere in the Caribbean, their per student spend will be a fraction, right? But when you get to countries like Japan and France and the UK and Switzerland and the Scandinavian countries, we still spend far more per student than they do, even when the cost of living may be a closer comparison.
Gotcha. So, and I just, it's one of those questions that always comes up too, right? It's like, okay, but it's expensive to live here. We gave teachers raises, and we do spend money on schools and students. But money alone is not the only thing that results in success. I think you need to invest money, but it's more than that, right? It's not just, I spent $100 million on education, voila, everything is fixed. It's just not that simple. if that were so, I would be a super genius, maybe an astrophysicist or a rocket scientist. But, still spent a lot of money on a college education. Still not a genius, not yet.
Well, there's still time because they've expanded the scholarship offerings for postgraduate studying.
I was a little bit excited about that, and I might be a little too elderly for this at the moment, but I was really actually thought that was great. I don't want the economy to crash over this or anything, but the opportunity to continue upskilling as we mature. I did a couple of years ago look at getting because I did my master's work and then didn't do the comprehensive, right? Came to work instead. And regretted that later because I would love to have taught, at different seasons in my life, and I'd still like to do that at some point. And so that the challenge was, gosh, it's really expensive to do level, master's or doctorate level work in the specific area that is my field, right? So I thought about that. I was like, wow, I just can't afford that. And expanding that tier, I think, is interesting because it does show a commitment to different sectors in terms of education. But I digress.
Yeah, and I think the initial reaction I'm getting from principals and teachers and some of the nonprofits that have filled these kind of gaps is it's welcome news. They're happy to hear it. They want to see how it's going to play out and how it's going to happen. But I think a lot of positive reception to the introduction of these programs.
Yeah.
And I guess because I like numbers, it's interesting with over the past 10 years or so, the government and through successive administrations, they have focused more. We used to say when I was at the Compass, we said we had a savior that said every dollar is a decision. So every amount that that the government decides to, or any organization puts in their budget is a discrete decision whether or not how much importance you place on a particular thing. So if you look in 2014, education was 10% of core government spending.
Mm-hmm.
In 2018, it was 13%. So it rose. By 2024, it's going to be 18% of the budget. So we're talking almost double the emphasis put on education spending in a decade. And I don't know how much money is the right amount to spend on education, and I don't think anybody does. But I do think that from a very kind of high level, you can see that the government is considering this to be really, really important and maybe the most important thing in the country.
So I may sound very American, but I'm Caymanian, but I also have American roots as well. So I've been one foot in each world for most of my life. And one of the criticisms I often heard, and frankly, sometimes I still have a thin skin about, is I can't find any Caymanians to do the job. Sometimes you can't. And then it was the other barrier was I found some Caymanians and they have aptitude and talent, but I'm running a business. I do not have time to do all the things to get them to where they need to be. Changing that does start early in the equation. You have to create a different mindset in the student. They have to learn more than just the academic components. They have to learn certain kinds of socialization skills. I know it sounds highly strange, but I found public speaking extremely difficult. I still do, unless it's just a camera and a thing. And more work in those sorts of skills that would have helped build more confidence in the work environment would have made me more sellable as a Canadian. And so I feel like on a positive note, you are removing any barrier to the stereotypes by providing your population. I was going to say endemic, but I'm not actually sure that that's really the correct term because we go back and forth from everywhere. All the boats, Cuba, Cayman, Jamaica, everywhere, all of us, right? But I think that removing any barriers to the knee-jerk reaction that nobody here knows what to do does really help, I think, change that dynamic. There are many other factors you're going to have to work on along the way, but everything from the academic performance to how to function and grow in a work environment, things like networking, socialization. And I think it was the principal of John Gray, um, talked a lot about, and it might have been 1500 too, they were talking a lot about growth mindset, and just trying to change how we see ourselves and our capacity and ability to do things. You would think that we can learn all that on YouTube or on the internet, but to be honest, things have to be reinforced throughout your system. So when I was saying it's not just money, I think you have to decide, much like Patrick's good business meetings, with goals and steps. You have to do the same thing in terms of you're spending a great deal of money. Are all of these things going to result in the outputs you want? You have to be really clear about what your outputs are. A bunch of college degrees is great, but in and of itself, just graduating from college or graduating from high school is actually not enough to get you ready for the world of work and life, unless the caliber of that education does do that. And look, I went to school here up to 11th grade, and then I went to a prep school in the States, and I don't even a high-tier prep school in the States. I mean, like, this is where they got, they're like here, they're here, and they're here, and they're here. And it was tough. It was some of the hardest work I had to do. I could not coast. I had to study 5 times harder than I ever had. This is not to say my school here was bad. It was a good school. I had great teachers. But the competitiveness and the rigor were different there. More similar, I think, to what I see for A-levels and O-levels. You know what I mean? It's what I'm seeing from that is, wow, that's tough. You really have to really work hard. So I guess my what I'd like to see from this is, okay, great, this is where the money's going. Here's how you're going to do these things. But what are your measures of success?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And one of the things that is available, the statistics that are this week on the Cayman Current, we looked at kind of how transparent is the Cayman education system compared to regional peers in first world nations. And I guess one of the short answers is there's a lot more public statistics available for the public schools here than the private schools, which is typical in most countries. But one of the measures that you can count on getting year after year in Cayman that you can't find in other regional territories or even peers like Bermuda is the end of year 11 exam results. So that's one. Those are the standardized exams. So that's one benchmark that you can use to measure how well schools are doing year over year. To kind of add to that is the school inspection regime. So that includes a lot more factors other than one test. And so the progressives had actually had it in their campaign platform. They called it "Every School a Good School." So they said the time they're done with this 4-year period, they pledged that every public school would be a good school. And I believe that Roy McTaggart challenged the PACT government and said, "Are you guys going to make this same kind of commitment that we did?" Well, they did. They haven't in the SPS, but that would be another way, another kind of benchmark or goal that you could set is, hey, we're spending this much more money on education, so one of the things we need to get is every one of these schools needs to be rated good, or we're gonna have an 80% pass rate on exams within 4 years, up from about 60%.
Yeah, I mean,
So that's missing from this document. I don't know if this is the place for it, but we haven't seen it yet.
And I do expect to see, of course, past this more. We'll see what happens. The budget itself is November, I think, and that's where things hit the road because you are balancing so many different needs and interests across government. So you've pledged certain things, but the minutiae of those things still, things happen between now and then that people don't plan on. And keeping, the civil service is a huge employer, so keeping it stable is an important thing politically to do. If you campaigned on education being important, would expect as a first-term government that you would want to make this a huge priority, and have something tangible to say that you did.
Yeah, and this would definitely be tangible. And speaking of tangible, I'm glad you mentioned that word.
So glad.
So over 3 years, it's going to be a combined $440 million they're going to spend on education, just in operating expenditure. That doesn't include $100 million in capital projects. So these are the tangible things. So they want to complete the John Gray project. That's the big ticket item. They want to expand the Lighthouse School. I mentioned these new nursery programs and learning support centers. Well, they got to build those. They got to build classrooms for those. So they're going to be adding classrooms on to the schools. And then they're throwing UCCI. They're giving UCCI $10 million for capital projects, which may be related to they purchased and gave land to UCCI, and so they have plans for a new building there.
So, is there any potential impact on some of the private, and I don't mean the nonprofits, for example, providing food to schools for kids. I mean private educators like preschools. Is this going to negatively impact them? I wonder. I suppose it depends on capacity. If they're full and they can't take any more students, then there's definitely a need. But if I have to choose between free preschool and paying for preschool, depending on my situation in life, I may go for free preschool, which may impact some of the private schools. It's just a thought that came to me while we're talking about it. There may be some impact on some of the private sector components of this, and depending on your philosophy, of how the world should work, some may see that as a negative.
Well, if it'll certainly impact. I mean, assuming the plan is to basically make public pre-K, and not give vouchers and stuff to kids to attend the private pre-K, it'll definitely have an impact. And we saw this happen a few years ago when they added the reception programs to public schools. And the private ECCEs, as we call it, the early childhood care and education centers, they're businesses. They're pretty nimble. So they'll have to make decisions on what they can and can't do. And what's interesting to me is one of the priorities in the SPS is they say we're going to integrate Caymanian and non-Caymanian students in the school system. And then me being a little cheeky, I look and I say, okay, there's two parts of the education system that are totally integrated right now, and that's the nursery and preschools, because they don't have it in the public school system. So Caymanians and non-Caymanians mingle in the private schools. And then in the A levels, year 12 and 13, because the public school kids get funding to go finish off at the private schools. So they're gonna integrate it, but they're gonna take the Caymanian kids out of the private schools, both at the bottom and the top.
That's an interesting thing to look at over time, as our numbers guy, to see impact on enrollments, impact on composition of the different programs. I had, for example, every intention of my children attending public school the whole time they were here, but I had trouble with the class sizes, for example. With high me too. And so a larger class size is more difficult in terms of focus and distraction and that sort of stuff, right? In spite of what they say, the more things moving in a room that are shiny with people like me, for example, the harder it is to focus. So smaller class sizes were something that was appealing, for example. The sheer size of the high schools, as the kids got to that point, actually I found that quite intimidating, to be frank. I just could see my angel getting lost in the chaos. So that there are different reasons why people make the choices they make. They're not always about quality of education alone. Sometimes it's just the unique needs of your students. And I have seen a struggle sometimes in some of the large government schools. I see great stuff in that package. I'm not saying I don't. It's fabulous things. But I also see so many things for the teams there to manage. It's a lot. It's like the bigger the entity, the more moving pieces you're dealing with, the more challenging it can be to manage. So not just the integration or the integration, if you will, is an area to look at. But I also think one size doesn't fit all. And if the student, him or herself, is the priority, that should be somehow taken into account as things go along. Not saying they don't, just don't know yet how this is going to work. So just a few things to sort of think about.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I started doing not rumor patrol, but as soon as I heard the premiere, it was one of the headline programs. Is he said we're going to bring A levels back into the public schools, and I thought A levels, because right now the public high schools typically offer the CXC exams.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than the UK GCSEs.
Right. Oh, that's interesting.
So
yeah.
the CXCs would be CSEX and
Mm-hmm.
CAPE, and CAPE is the A level equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we all know, the Cayman's moving towards a more UK based national curriculum.
Yeah.
And so I thought, are they moving to GCSEs? So I checked, and the answer for right now appears to be no. So when they say we're bringing A levels back,
what does that mean?
It sounds like they're going to be doing A level equivalent for the CAPE exams. So that's only maybe of interest because if you're a parent of a public school student and you really want that British test for whatever reason, then you may still have to go to the private school for that. But again, this is
it's speculative, right? We're not sure exactly what that means.
But it doesn't sound like they're ditching CXC.
Yeah, and of course, if you look at UCCI, for example, it's not like you can't put some programming, on the more programming on the front end as an option as well, I suppose. ICCI is an American-based institution, so it's a bit different. So its focus would be more, I don't know, perhaps advanced placement stuff or college readiness, that type of thing. I was trying to think what that gap, if there is a gap, how you fill that gap with both UK and US-based things. I mean, ideally here, I'm not hung up on exactly which system it is. I do realize that there are very different learning styles, and these two systems are different in the way that they function. So I'm not a great test taker. I do well in certain types of things. Shocking. It was my GPA.
God,
it's hard. It's hard. Particularly certain styles of things that require massive retention of facts. I mean, I'm clearly such a detail-oriented person, but so I'm saying if you look at yourself and how you learn and put yourself in the position of the different things, I can see why one program would be appealing to one set of parents, one to another. At the end of the day, though, the quality of the thing itself is, I think, probably what will transcend. So whatever we think is going to best equip our students for success is likely to be the more popular thing in the bunch. And sometimes people like shiny and expensive too, right? So there are some people who it doesn't matter that it's free or it doesn't matter that it's affordable. They want the cachet of a private school education, for example. So you'll see some of that too, right?
And I thought it was interesting, something that the former education minister, Ralston Anglin, when he was running for election this time around, he said, flat out, education is a commodity. And just because we make it free or just because we open up the public school system to expats doesn't mean people are going to bite, because as you said, it's a commodity, as he said, it's a commodity. So every parent will make the best decision that they can for their own child. And they're going to take all of the factors into consideration, including cost. But it's not the only one.
And there is also sometimes when you don't have knowledge at a granular level of what's best. In truth, sometimes you make the best guess you can. So you have a perception that this particular school is better than the other schools. Sometimes not based on performance either. Sometimes it is literally just your perception of it. And so I suspect we'll see some of that too. But again, it'll be interesting to see if there are enrollment shifts. What impact some of this has. But if you're going to experiment, experimenting with a lot of money is preferable to experimenting with our children's futures with no money. So I think it is, strategically speaking, if I were a politician, it's a good move to put education at the top of that list and throw a bunch of money at it. I was thinking and I can't remember all five right now, but the five sort of motivators for stories, for news and whatnot. And it was stuff like family, community, safety, money. And for a family, education is a huge element of. It's why we go to work sometimes, to make sure our kids are not just sheltered and fed, but also that they are being, raised up in the way they should go academically. So I think that because it is such a priority for so many families and parents, and also if you look at things that maybe don't have a direct correlation always to education, but in our hearts and minds, we feel like the more things we can provide for our students, no matter where they are on the socioeconomic spectrum, that make it easier for them to have a more successful life, the less we're going to see things like gang violence and gun crime and that sort of stuff. I know it's not that simple, but if you sort of step back and really look at it, you're going to say, well, if they're really busy studying for A levels, they have time to get some guns. It sounds silly, but it's not that far off sometimes. And if we made education the really important thing to do, I think many people believe that it would help have an impact. That and also success postgraduate success in life. And I wax philosophic on the power of education.
Yeah, no, I think study after study has they common conclusion that every dollar you spend on education, particularly as the students get younger, translates into far more than a dollar in savings in terms of these trying to address the consequences of not having an educated population. And then it also leads to the plus side of the balance ledger in terms of economic gains and happiness indicators and things like that. So, if you're going to throw some money around, it's not the worst thing to throw money after.
Not at all.
We'll see, when it comes down to the results and the accountability, how effective the spending is. And I think it's also an important point, going back to Christmas, is how a lot of people pay for Christmas. You can do it by careful savings and planning throughout the year, and you get your Christmas budget. Or you can do what a lot of people do, and is take out the credit card and worry about it in February. So there's a little bit of that going on. I don't know. Most people, the previous Progressives government negotiated a $330 million line of credit to deal with the impacts of COVID on, say no tax money came in. Oh no, what do we do? How do we fund government? So, you get a line of credit. So the new government has chosen to use that line of credit. And I thought it was interesting that they're going to use it on capital projects. And so, as we said, $100 million of that debt spending is going to be on the education facility. So it's not, we're not paying as we go.
But you can't say that you're not gambling on the future. Because we're investing some debt on the kids. And in the end, the kids are going to have to pay for it. So we hope it works out. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah.
But in truth, that's in a way what we're doing, right? Is
you like that new library at John Gray, didn't you?
You got to pay for it. And look, hopefully it works. And of course, let's just, not to be too flippant, which I can be. If you think about it, it also makes sense at times like this, when we really aren't there yet on the whole border reopening tourism thing yet, right? I know we've announced some plans, but a date is just a date until you actually hit the benchmarks to get to sail through, right? So that said, I think investing in capital projects also makes sense because it provides a lot of labor, and it does, I got to say, there are people from all different backgrounds working in the industries that benefit from construction in Cayman. And there's a term for it, which I cannot remember for the life of me now, but it is one of those industries in Cayman in particular that it does feed a lot of people in many different ways. And because of that, and by the way, not everyone in the industry has to be highly educated from an academic perspective to do that. They do have to be, frankly, highly skilled in many areas, but not always highly educated. But
Yes.
I think taking care of education on the one front, and also making sure that there are jobs and money flowing through the sector during this period of time. I feel a little FDR-ish at the moment. Build a dam or something. This does kind of, make sense. It's just whether it will work or not, because you're kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit in terms. Because they did mention, the main pillars of the economy, and I can't remember if it was Mr. Saunders or the premier who talked about part of the approach is to stimulate, different types of businesses that maybe aren't traditional to what we've had here in the past, to diversify potentially, right? But I don't know what those are yet, and I don't see them yet. So it takes a while to grow an industry, and the world that we had a few years ago has changed a bit. Things are a bit different now. So what may have looked like an easy path to success 3 years ago, not necessarily the case now. And in a non-educated but connected to education front, and I know we've talked for like 3 hours now, that I thought was interesting because I am a bit of a nerd, was we talked about the undersea cable. So anyone who did anything during COVID understood the challenge of not having enough internet in a country of our size, particularly with the students having to go online. There was lots of shouting up and downstairs because they're trying to do their Zoom call, and it's pixelated on the screen. In fact, some of you watching are wondering why I'm still pixelated on the screen, and that's because we need more bandwidth.
Yeah.
So an undersea cable will provide ideally more internet capacity for the country, and ideally make it a bit more affordable as well, because you can't promise students all of this stuff and this technology for the future, and then none of them have the ability to truly utilize them the way they should. I mean, you can, but it's bad.
Yeah, and because right now Cayman has two connections to the world, right? It's the Jamaica cable fiber. I think it's cable fiber system. So Jamaica, and then the Maya one, which goes loops through Mexico and up.
Yeah.
So a big thing with having a third cable is the resilience factor. So even more than increasing how much data you can get, which it's amazing how much more bandwidth they're able to coax from these through improvements on the land, compression, blah blah.
Yeah, it changes,
But we've all been through it. It's happened a couple times since I've been here where oops, something hit the cable, internet's down, and you go, wait, what? How do you hit a cable? Well, the bottom of a ship hit the thing and it's cut, or something comes and damages it. So having the third cable provides so much more resilience, and that really is. And I think it was maybe Tech Cayman and Enterprise City have both mentioned that having that third cable is so vital, because if you have businesses that live on the internet, you need that lifeline. It's absolutely essential. So
it's critical also to things like financial services as well. And so if you put all those into the equation, plus look, we never expected a lockdown in the first place. And so the voice, the prepping voice of doom on this, although I still don't have supplies, is if you can do something now to build the infrastructure so that you don't have this risk in the event anything ever occurs again, in the rest of the time, it also just means better service for everyone. And with the government investing heavily in providing technology directly to students and their families, this will, I think, be an asset to that as well. So that's me. I do sound a bit, joyful about it all, but I just think it's the future, and if we don't provide the infrastructure we need, it's not just classrooms, right? It's technology, being able to use it well, understanding, how it works to a degree, And you can't be world class if you don't have world class infrastructure. You can still be world class talent, but it doesn't mean you can't always deliver if you don't have the right tools or the right infrastructure in place. So I preach no more on this subject today.
No, it's interesting because I forget what year it was, but when I worked at the Compass, I used to spend a lot of time reading through the archives, especially from the '60s. And there was a whole article about like the first fax. So it was like the first fax machine, and they kind of went on how vital having fax machine technology here was for financial services. And I'm sure
Yeah.
at the time when people were reading it, they were going, "What am I ever going to use a fax machine for?"
What is this
Well,
for?
yeah, and I hate to say it, but there are some institutions here that still are relying on faxes to make financial transactions. So as it turns out, like that was, that was really important to have. Um,
It's the future. Okay, maybe it's the internet is the facts of the future. So, all right. On that said, Patrick and I, when we first started talking about doing Edbeat at the regular segment, it can be 5 minutes long. Patrick
yes,
really didn't know me very well yet. It is now 41 minutes and 22 seconds, all of which will make its way onto the internet. Thank you guys for spending time with us today, and Patrick, thank you as always. Don't forget, you can check out Patrick's stellar work at caymanprint.org. I like to keep his website up in the background so I can see if he's posted anything while I'm, nodding and smiling. But there's lots of great stuff on it right now. He hasn't today. And so in addition to the overviews of kind of what's going on in education across the island, Patrick also does some in-depth stuff as well, which I really like. I like the interviews. I do like the data attention, which is quite fun as well. But it's caymancurrent.org. It is a nonprofit. So when you get there, there's ways to donate, subscribe to his newsletter, all that good stuff.
yes, donate.
Today. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Patrick, thank you as always. I'm going to try to roll the little video clip that says we're going away, and then we'll pretend to leave and talk off camera for a good 15 to 20 minutes about kids, life, tea, and the internet.